Hello, everyone. I'm Cindy Weigel, and I want to welcome everyone to our webinar today, Iris Technology for Law Enforcement, and thanks to everyone for joining us. We're going to be looking at how law enforcement agencies in the U.S. are adding biometrics, like iris recognition, to their identity and authentication tools. We all know as criminals are getting more sophisticated, it's more important than ever to be able to identify people correctly and consistently as they enter, move through, and leave the law enforcement system. Today's webinar is presented by Iris ID, a US-based global provider of iris recognition solutions and a market leader in iris and face biometrics, and ImageWare. ImageWare provides biometric identification and authentication for access to data, products, services, and facility. The company has a history in law enforcement and built the first statewide digital booking platform for local law enforcement in the United States. Our first presenter today is Tim Meyerhoff. Tim is the director of Iris ID. He has more than 15 years of experience in biometrics and ID management industry, in the biometric and ID industry, and participated in more projects that use multiple biometric modalities. Tim is highly proficient in the technical attributes of the key modalities, namely iris, face, and fingerprint. He'll be providing an overview of iris recognition and its use in law enforcement. We also have Jonathan Nichols, Principal Product Manager for ImageWare. He will be talking about biometric identification and authentication systems for law enforcement and give us a demonstration of how it works. We know as we're going along, you may have questions, and we definitely want to answer those and answer as many as we can. So please post your questions in the chat box on your GoToWebinar screen. At the end of the presentations, we'll look at those and try to answer as many as we can. So, we're going to get right to it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Thank you, Cindy, for the introduction. At first, I want to talk a little bit about the focus we have for law enforcement and what's happened with iris recognition over the past about 5 years, particularly with state and local and also national databases. But first, I have to do the proverbial, the iris is not the retina. So next slide, Shauna, right? So iris recognition takes an image of the iris, not the retina. Retina is at the back of your eye. So we're talking about basically iris recognition technology, but today I want to leave here with a little technical refresh. The iris is not the retina is at the back of your eye. Think of that red spot that you see sometimes on a flash picture. That's your retina being reflected. That's something that your ophthalmologist looks at. An iris camera does not look or see the retina. It only sees the colored portion at the front of your eye. And I'll dispel the next myth about iris recognition on the next slide. Shauna? So we use what's called near infrared illumination to get a really good black and white image of a person's eye, right? So we extract only that portion of the iris and we create a template from it. There's a lot of misconception in the market that we're using lasers or bright lights or something like that to capture that image, and we're not. If you're concerned about that, I would suggest that you don't go outdoors, even on a cloudy day, because that's almost 1,000 times more wideband IR than you get exposed to from an iris camera. Simple process. We capture that, we turn it into a template, and we match it. Completely eye safe. It's ISO and ANSI certified for safety. Next slide. So iris, one of the unique things about it is it works where a lot of other biometrics don't work. particularly if we talk about fingerprints or hand geometry, which is kind of going away, or facial recognition, particularly in these days of COVID, when people are wearing masks. It is highly accurate at a very large scale. So environments like biochemical labs where people are wearing hazmat suits or glasses, goggles, hard manual labor where fingerprints are worn over time, iris recognition technology has the benefit of non-contact, and it's an optimal choice for just about any environment. But then again, we have to consider multimodal and the fact that facial recognition and fingerprint have been the mainstay for many, many years. So I'm going to move on to the concept of where we are today with respect to government applications, right? So for many years, we have been integrated into the Department of Defense ABIS. That's warfighter primarily identification, and that was used a lot in theater. Also, DOJ AFIS, which is the FBI system, and DHS IDENT. Now, the databases here are not really large right now as compared to fingerprint or mugshot. But the FBI initiated an iris pilot with Iris ID in 2014, which ImageWare participated in for a client application to be able to collect iris images. Interesting note is that multiple agencies feed this triad of databases here in the US. And there were over 200 law enforcement agencies that participated in the pilot back in 2014 with Iris ID and also ImageWare. But aside from this pilot that was done with state and local law enforcement, there was a really big pilot done with US Border Patrol for those illegal crossings into the United States where face, finger, and iris were also collected. I should know that the Border Patrol alone today feeds somewhere around 40,000 enrollments per month that get pushed into both DHS IDENT and the DOJ. They used to call it IAFIS, but now it's called NGI. It's a little bit dated, that little diagram. Also, on top of that, there are 14 other agencies, including the Coast Guard, US SOCOM. It's a pretty long list of other agencies that feed that triad of data. So the repository is growing now exponentially. And we can go to the next slide. So to feed that database, we have a lot of partners. Today, we're talking specifically with ImageWare. This is kind of a short list. Some of these brands might be recognizable to you. It's a fairly short list with respect to the Iris ID global footprint. And hundreds of other integrators around the world do systems for a lot of different types of applications that might not specifically be law enforcement, but go into some of our other vertical markets. In a few minutes, you're going to learn more about the projects and programs we have engaged with ImageWare over the years. I think it's almost a 15-year history that we have with ImageWare. They're both similar and diverse at the same time. So it's maybe we get some follow-on questions. So now I want to talk a little bit about the FBI Iris pilot, which is no longer a pilot, but these are use cases that C just outlined, and there's a link in here that you can go to the FBI website and say, okay, this is what we think you can use Iris for. It's an excerpted list here from the pilot. CGIS actually, to do an enrollment in NGI, they do require at the same time that you submit iris images that 10 prints are there. And that's because of the history. But frankly speaking, fingerprint is the mainstay for the FBI, has been for many, many years. And only became automated to some extent, I think, in the late 90s. You may correct me if I'm wrong about that. That's what I'm recalling. But it's common for an agency to actually have their own local database for iris matching. That's one of the things that ImageWare brings to the table. And then also be able to reach out to a state level, you know, from a local to a county to a state level, and then up to the federal level where data gets shared. More and more states are adding iris recognition. And recently, we have Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Georgia. I believe that Idaho, Illinois, and Michigan are just about to turn it on, but don't quote me on that. It's getting really close, though. One of the benefits in this COVID era, more so than ever before, is that it's a non-contact biometric, and that iris has been proven to be not biased with respect to race, ethnicity, gender, and performs extremely well in very large data sets. So then I would, intake and release, transportation, and one-to-end and investigative searches were the high-level application spaces that were realized in the pilot based on what the end users were doing with it. So it is a lot of local or regional in the past, since 2014, Jonathan, I think, since we started that. And now it's moving much more towards the national level. And on the next slide, I'll just touch on a couple of examples that we have. NYPD, for example. That data right now actually has been collected on people that have been booked for about 8 years now, but it hasn't been shared yet with the national database. It's underway now with IDEMIA, but primarily what NYPD uses it for is an arraignment process where they book the people, they stay overnight, basically. They get lined up to be arraigned in the morning, and they use iris recognition to ID the people that are in the line, get all the dockets in order, and then they can rapidly move them through the courtroom to see the judge, and they're in the right order. Excuse me, that the documents match the particular offendee. Border Patrol has been collecting face, finger, and iris in the E3 program since about 2014, late 2014. They do collect somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 enrollments per month. It's very interesting for state and local folks to know that they can do a search on the national database that's in ident/CGIS to be able to see if they get a quick hit on a potential illegal immigrant as far north as Illinois. Kendall County actually was one of our customers that was really interested in that capability. And then LA County, which is also called LACRIS, all of their live scans, 187 systems currently utilize iris recognition, and you'll see a picture of that in a couple of minutes. So from an iris ID perspective, on the next slide, I'll let Jonathan talk about San Bernardino because that's an ImageWare thing. We have a wide variety of imagers and also software products that people like ImageWare integrate into their solutions, whether it's device control or a matching system. The next slide shows like an eye chart of the devices that we offer today. They vary in price and capability. So I'm sorry about the eye chart, but suffice it to say there's devices for a particular use case or environment, whether it be wall mount, distance, desktop, handheld, mobile. And we're now in the process with CGIS, and it's managed by NIST, a thing called Iris Imager Selection Guide, which it's targeted at specifically the law enforcement community. So there's a whole bunch of vendors involved in that to help law enforcement agencies make easier decisions on what kind of device that they want to purchase for adding iris to their system. The next slide is an example of a live scan system. This is the one that has been deployed at Los Angeles County. The camera that's shown here on the right actually captures both the monochromatic image for iris and face at the same time. It's mounted on an articulating arm, so it's really easy to point it at the offender that's being booked. That's one of our kind of like OEM modules. It's very similar to what ImageWare supports in their standard offering. Actually, it's the same software, plug and play. There's also a tethered webcam in this particular environment. In some cases, scar, mark, and tattoo cannot be captured with the iCam, so they have a webcam that's on a wire that they can be able to do that. So on the next slide, you can see the user interface, and this is actually emulated on the screen of the live scan system to assist the officer to be able to point the camera at the individual, capture their iris, capture their face, both at the same time, and make the booking process a little bit faster. Right? The next product that I'm going to show you is something that we're going to have available at the end of the year, because this has been something that law enforcement has been asking for a number of years, something that works more at a distance because of COVID. Of course, it's got a temperature sensor on the top of it for fever detection, but you can be up to a meter away from this device, and it'll capture both face and iris at the same time. And Shauna, if you could go to the next slide and play that little video that I have on here. But you get an idea of how this works. For some reason, there it goes. So no matter where you move in that capture range from any angle or any height, we can also put it behind Lexan and it'll be vandal proof at that point where people can't punch it or hit it. You can be tall, short, and it'll capture your face and your iris. This is initial prototype that we built almost a year ago. Mass production is scheduled for the end of this calendar year. Next slide. And that's about it for what I have with respect to the look into the national database and that, and where we've been with respect to the larger U.S. government agencies. I'm going to pass the baton to Jonathan, and he's going to talk a little bit more about what ImageWare does, which is not just law enforcement. They do a lot of other things, but they've had a focus on law enforcement for many years.
Thank you, Tim. I just want to say that ImageWare is a willing and able partner to work with you again, because I agree, we've been partners for the last 15 years working on some really interesting biometric identity management programs. Shauna, let's go ahead and get into the beyond this title slide. So I'd love to point out that Tim, it was great working with you 8 years ago on the iris recognition pilot that that preceded this effort that effectively established the NGI iris service. And we all learned how to look at iris as a biometric technology that could be as effective as fingerprint. Of course, we all know that law enforcement is now and forever will make use of fingerprint for a primary source of identification. But in that pilot program, we all came to understand how much easier it could be to capture images of irises and submit them no different than the way transactions are submitted for fingerprint enrollment or fingerprint matching. And just the simple fact, the time it takes to do a 10 print capture compared to a click of a button to get the two iris images, it presents a lot of advantages for law enforcement kind of booking processes. So the middle bullet on this slide talks a little bit about how ImageWare is not a biometric device vendor. In fact, we've made our claim to fame by working with multimodal biometrics and really building applications that support the use of the right biometric at the right time. We have technology that makes use of different vendors' algorithms for different biometric technologies, and we've benefited from our long partnership with you, Tim, because your algorithms work very well. Your product slide that's an eye chart, it's actually nice to see that, because way back 15 years ago, yeah, I think you had only a product or two, and we made heavy use of them, but it's nice to see that you've grown the product line and made your products be available in even in a mobile handheld form.
No longer a one-trick pony, that's for sure.
Exactly. Now, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, and we'll look a little bit more at we recognize that that this quote from Scott Rago is really a forerunner to what we in the industry all expect. That it's that the NGI iris service is going to be a key component of how criminal identification works in the U.S. And Tim, you've been good at talking about it at the federal level, and having that flow down to a state level and even a regional or a county level, because the reality is that the use of various different technologies is really important. You know, police work doesn't just start and stop with fingerprint. It makes use of all kinds of available information and available biometrics. So let's go to the next slides, Shauna. I want to, the partnership value that ImageWare brings to the law enforcement community is that we approach booking as an information technology process, where from our background 25 or more years ago, where we worked with mugshots and creating really the face image kind of portion of a booking process, and then added to that the support for other modalities. That's really what ImageWare offers for the partnership with IrisID. We've got a way of making the booking process seamlessly make use of their excellence in image capture for iris and even face, and incorporate that with other elements that are really necessary when any kind of criminal arrest is happening and there's a booking being completed. So our model has been to use our multimodal approach and include what's needed, what's desired, what's maybe required by the local jurisdiction, and as well as what's necessary, for example, making use of the 10-print fingerprint capture process, and include that in our booking as well. Kind of an important part of our architectural diagram here is that we easily add iris. I don't want to say it's trivial, but we've been doing it for so long it seems like it's trivial. But we incorporate that in the typical creation of a booking database with arrest records, as well as easily transform that into the connections that need to be made from a booking database into the external systems that really are now a fundamental part of criminal justice in the US. So creating the way of taking, well, I don't want to say exotic, but creating the way of taking the unique biometric imaging and other booking information and being able to share that, whether it's with a local government records management system or a jail management system or any other related department like parole. That's just a fundamental part of how ImageWare approaches all of the biometric capabilities along with booking records and transforms that into really information technology messaging. So in addition to that concept related to ImageWare capture for the booking process, we also create an easy way of incorporating the fast identification, the fast and accurate identification possible for local biometric systems. So there's an icon on this diagram for the biometric engine in which we support different vendors' algorithms for different modalities. And of course, we have a great preference for the IrisID algorithms because of our 15 years of support with them. Really, the last part about this architecture is ImageWare, like all of the industry, all of the user community, we're working with more and more of the available technology, whether that's on mobile devices, whether it's a tablet or a laptop, or even it's amazing how much the purpose-built devices with biometric capabilities are now fitting inside, a cargo pocket on an officer's uniform. So that's from 25 years ago, where a booking station was very much bolted to the ground and included a cabinet of lots of heavy metal capabilities. We're now moving towards the environment where all of the same wide range of modalities can be incorporated in a phone that has amazing identification technologies at the push of a button. So Shauna, let's go to the next slide, where I've got just a simple representation of ImageWare's new screens for booking, where we just show that the booking process with biometric with iris images shows up as a simple image component of a booking record. And of course, we've done that in conjunction with the TIMS ICAM 7 series device. I highly recommend these devices. In fact, before ImageWare went to work from home, we had that device at the front office, the front doors of the office, and literally everybody got rid of any kind of access control cards because you would approach the reader, look at it, it would tell you to move closer or move back and automatically capture your images, and then you could open the door. Fantastic piece of technology, Tim. I'm glad you made it. Let's go on to the next slide where pretty much.
I hate to interrupt there, Jonathan, but you guys do a lot of stuff, and you've done a lot of access control with us over the years, a lot of large scale ID programs, a lot of corrections stuff. And it does have applications. Iris has applications, certainly access control, time and attendance, corrections, law enforcement. So there's a lot of different things that we've been able to collaborate on over the years, and that's one of the things that's been really fun about working with ImageWare over the years, is the flexibility. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Tim, I really appreciate that. This deck of slides, this presentation has focused in on how our marketplace in supporting criminal justice work and police work with booking. It talks about one kind of set of ImageWare's capabilities, but you're absolutely right that really one of our largest and longest projects has involved the incorporation of fingerprint and iris technology that's used on smart cards for high security work. And so I'm pretty sure that goes back to about 2006, where the concept of a smart card with not a lot of memory could still include the iris template and a fingerprint template. Once again, promoting the idea that you sometimes will benefit from having a door that has an iris reader, and other times the available technology will be something different. It may only be MyFair, DESFAR kind of electronic access control, or it may be that a fingerprint reader is what's present. The really truly the flexibility of the applying the accurate identification of the iris algorithm you built leads to having highly secure systems, whether it's for access control or for incorporation in effectively arrestee management, whether it's at a holding cells in jails or at parole stations or for work release kind of programs. And
privacy has always been a very big concern, and I know ImageWare, when we crossed that chasm, so to speak, between the offender database and the access control or time and attendance kind of database, that you guys are really good about separating that data, right? Which is very important, because there's a lot of concerns about privacy, because we bumped into over the years a lot of applications where they want to use iris for intake and release, and then they want to use it for access to the evidence room, and we have to talk to the customer and say, hey, this is separate. These people go in this database and those people go in the other one, and they don't commingle, right? And that's something I believe that ImageWare has always been very cognizant of over the years, where we can separate that easily.
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right, because by virtue of working with, ImageWare is often, I'm sure we have in the millions and millions of identity badges that are related to real identity cards without any biometrics, or merely a face image on an identity card, and that's a willing participant who is using that for secure access, and that's totally different than the kind of highly protected, highly governed by specifications and security guidelines that CGIS is promoted.
GDPR, for example, too. Yeah,
And yeah,
that's
yeah,
something that
absolutely.
reaches internationally, not so much domestic. Yeah.
Yeah. So this slide was really meant to let us talk a little bit about our history and the different kinds of partnerships. I think we've touched on all of those, and if I could get us to go to the next slide, we'll just have a chance to summarize. Here's really the value proposition for having an ImageWare component that's added to the partnership for the Iris technology, the Iris devices that Iris ID supports. You know, I'll let you read these items, but really the story here is that we've got a long history in supporting the what I call the criminal information technology, and support sheriffs and police departments and other related agencies to make use of the interesting biometric capabilities, but use them in the same way that they're easy to access and that they're effective for really for having cops be able to do the kind of identification and investigative work that they do, that they need to do, without being challenged by the technology. So that's really the story of ImageWare, and again, we really look forward to helping show you, our prospective customers, how easy it is to incorporate this innovative and new and really effective technology into your criminal justice work. So with that, I think I've covered all my slides. I think, Shauna, the next point is come and see us at the NSA conference, and we'll show you how easy it is to use Iris as a part of your booking process.
Yeah, we're in booth 214. ImageWare will be there with quick capture, right, Jonathan?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, that
So,
looks like we've come to the end of the presentation. If anybody has any questions, it looks like we have a little bit of time for questions here. If anybody has some questions, please send them to us. I've got a couple here that we might answer, that you guys set up for you guys to answer. One question is, since you're adding all these modalities to the booking and release process, how does that affect the speed of moving people through the law enforcement system?
Well, that's a great question, in that we recognize that when you're doing a criminal arrest, especially for a felony, you're trying to capture all of the desired biometrics, and I shouldn't say desired, really the mandatory biometrics. So you're capturing fingerprints because that's historically what is used for identification, and more you're capturing palm prints, and that takes as long as it takes. You know, it's even with the advancements in technology, the process of capturing the set of prints is timely, time consuming. When Tim was showing the D2000 video, you saw how quickly that machine is automatically tracking the image that it's trying to take and finding the resolution of the iris images and capturing that photo. And as a longtime user of the Iris ID technology, I assert that you'll be amazed how quickly you can capture a highly accurate set of biometrics that can be used with 1 to n matching against databases with hundreds of millions of records, and get responses really in a matter of seconds. This is
Shauna, go to the slide about the FBI use cases, if you would, just back up there. Because the one of the areas that, yeah, it's way back there, keep going. One of the areas that they identified was, that's my dog barking, was intake and release. And that's been really common for almost the past 19 years, where it was a silo system for intake and release. But what Jonathan was talking about is, because of the biometric engine that ImageWare has, you can do local matching, one to N, but at the same time, you can create records that can be utilized in a much larger scope, like a national database. So intake and release, make sure you're letting the right guy go. Transportation, moving a person from facility A to B. And then a big value is investigative searches, which span the three major databases that exist within the US repository. There's a big value in that. Now, I have to mention, and Jonathan knows this quite well, that if you want to do an enrollment into the CGIS database of an iris, at the same time, you have to supply a 10 print, because that's their core basis for operations. That being said, searches can be iris only. And I did mention, ident, which is now called HART. HART will accept iris only, or iris plus face, or all three modes. So from an immigration perspective, there's a little bit of a variance between US government agencies. Jonathan, I don't know if you've bumped into that just yet, if you have an opinion on that, but yeah, for enrollment into the national database, you have to have a 10 print.
Tim,
State level or local level, the policy varies, I think. It's not really clear to me right now.
no, it's good that you call that out, and the expectation is, just like there's relationships between the local agency and the state agency and the federals. The idea behind using fingerprints, just talking about that, the idea is you're looking for an accurate, positive identification of the people you're working with. So you're willing to ask the question several times. Can you find, using whichever biometrics you choose, can you find the person in the local ABIS system? Even finding that, you're going to want to ask the state to confirm that and let you know if they've got a state ID for that person. And then the reality of all of the interconnected criminal justice is the same request goes to the FBI and they'll gladly give you a federal ID. So Tim, your relationship between enrollment in the NGI IRIS service is associated with fingerprints as well, because that's the historical record, for federal ID numbers.
Right. That being said, though, we have a huge repository of iris in the DoD database that was collected by warfighters, and many times they only had iris and face.
Exactly.
And they didn't have time to collect fingerprint. But there's a lot of bad guys in that repository, which is, I think it's about 2.5 million or 3 million right now of iris data that sits in there. And if you do a probe on CGIS or FBI database, it's going to hit DoD. Now, there's a lot of policies involved with respect to government stuff, what information you get back with respect to a match, if it's an iris-only search. But, you know, you look at that immigration database, DOD, and CGIS, the repository is growing exponentially. So the value goes up there, especially with, like I mentioned, the Border Patrol with 40,000 enrollments going in there every month. It's a crazy number.
Well, great. Thanks, you guys, for that. That was a great answer. The other question that we have deals with hacking. You know, we're all hearing so much about hacks. It's all over the news right now. So it's a, you know, a big issue for everyone. How about these systems? How are they resistant to hacking, or what are the vulnerabilities there?
Let me start with that, and then I'll let Jonathan go. On commercial deployment for us, like I mentioned, Iris ID does a lot of work with physical access, time and attendance, workforce management, which are not necessarily in the law enforcement community. On those commercial products, we apply all kinds of encryption on the data. We never save an image, like that slide that I showed, that Jonathan showed for their quick capture enrollment, where you see the image. In law enforcement, you need the image, but in a commercial application, it's only a template that's saved, and always that template is encrypted with a unique triple DES, AES encrypted signature, so people can't use it anyplace else. It would be basically garbage, right? But in the law enforcement space, images are always something that are saved, right? Because as Jonathan mentioned, there are multiple algorithms available, and at some later time, maybe 5 years down the road, or 2 years, or 10 years, they want to re-enroll those images, re-templatize them. So in the LE community, yeah, images are important. Yeah. What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, no, Tim, you're absolutely right. I want to effectively say that for the 15 years that I've been at ImageWare and working in support of our law enforcement products and our customers, it's always struck me that the people who work with the criminal justice information, they knew way before enterprise or commercial space understood that you had to do extra work to protect access to these systems and to protect the data that you're storing in the systems. So everybody understands that hacking is possible. Some of the worst hacks, are some of the dumbest actions of, if a celebrity gets arrested, somebody wants to get a picture of that celebrity because I don't know, it's a fun topic on social media. But the professionals in this space know that there are specs and guidelines for how to protect the security of the criminal justice information and go through rigorous ways of protecting access and using multi-factor authentication, for example, before anybody just willy-nilly gains access to a booking system. You're right, Tim, that there's an intent to maintain the integrity of imaging and booking records that are collected, because nobody really knows at what point in time that that info may be needed. It may be possible to submit a new identification search and actually end up solving a crime. So,
or it could be adjudication in a court of law.
Exactly.
That's something that we have for fingerprint today, because it's been around since the 1800s.
Yeah, exactly.
But for iris, if we look at the time scale for automated fingerprint identification, I mean, we're talking mid 90s when
Yeah.
the first stuff was set up with CGIS, right?
Yep. Right.
And it's come a long way, from the mid 90s until NGI came along, which was almost 2009 when they announced NGI, right? That included some capability for initial capability for face and then iris. So it's if you look at the timeline and maturity and adoption, we're on scale with respect to iris being a big component with respect to face, finger, and iris with respect to national identification for law enforcement applications. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great,
It's been a
thanks, Tim and Jonathan. Do we have time for one more? I can kind of put these two together if that works for you guys. One more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So somebody is asking about the cost of the systems, not just the money cost, but the manpower and the training costs. How much do you need? What are the resources that go into these systems?
Well, I'm going to start with that, Jonathan, just to talk about the hardware cost, right? And it really depends on the environment. It can be as high as 10,000 for distance product, and as low as 1,000 for some of the other items or devices that we have in the lineup, right? So it depends on what the customer wants from a collection standpoint. Training, oh my goodness. Whenever you introduce something new to any group of anybody for any application, I don't care if it's biometric or it's purely IT. There is an amount of training that's involved. We are very active with organizations like NIST to provide training that's vendor independent with respect to iris collection. There's the IREX series that talks about best practices for that, and that's been very helpful over the years. And then from a software integration and software support capability, it really varies on what the customer wants. Maybe, I don't know if Jonathan is prepared to talk about that at the moment, about like licensing and things like that, but that varies a lot depending on what
Tim,
components that they need, right, Jonathan? Yeah.
I'll just say that, look, for any kind of criminal justice info system, with all of our experience, we know that what happens is that you've got a workforce that's dynamic and needs to go through regular training, and maybe adding new users have to go through the process of getting trained on how to use the system. In general, iris technology is much easier to contemplate how to train your new booking officers, let's say, because the especially with the experience and the innovation that Tim, that your company has been working with, for innovating your products over the last 2 decades, it's clear to me that you've taken so much of the process of using this technology and embedded it into automated controls and embedded it into making it so that a booking officer can almost point and shoot now, whereas, you know, maybe 20 years ago, there was very much a stand here, step back, you know, manual instruction
yeah.
in order to get the right photo captured.
Yeah.
But that really, it dramatically improves the ability of a agency to say, look, we're going to minimize our training costs because we've got really good equipment here that has in some ways improved or automated or streamlined what the booking process can be.
Yeah, maybe we should do another follow-up call in a couple of weeks, Jonathan, and show that in a little bit more detail. That would be good.
Good.
Okay, well, that's great. Shauna, do you want to put up the contact information? I think, you know, that's all we have time for right now. And, you know, maybe we can continue this at another time. But I want to thank everybody right now, all of our presenters and everybody else who joined us today. You'll see if you have questions or you want to contact either Tim or Jonathan, it's on your screen right now. There's, you know, please reach out to them. And hopefully we'll see you at NSA, the annual conference in Phoenix. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cindy. You bet.